Why are you interested in international investigative journalism? Where is your interest coming from?
It came from a story that came to me at the end of 2012. I was contacted by a totally unknown person in England because he had found a story that I had written about 4 years ago, and the key words in that story came up on a search when he was looking for information. He was also looking for a journalist to write his story. He had already approached local newspaper in Britain. He had already approached the London Times. They'd both said no, they weren't interested in the story. So he was interested not only in understanding what had happened to himself, but he was also interested in coverage. So when he found information in an article, he looked at the top and found who wrote it, and then searched for me and wrote me an email and said, "This is what's going on, and would you write the story?" I wasn't interested at the time. I had done a lot of work which had been very emotionally stressful over a lot of years, and I didn't want to do it anymore. And so I replied politely. I didn't offer to meet him, but I did say that I would be back in England, and he was up north. I said I would be, as far north as I would go would be Cambridge. That's where I was already going to. And if he wanted to see me, he could come and see me, and that's where I left it. However, a few weeks later, we were in Cambridge, and he drove down to us on an icy, snowy night. And upon meeting him, I realised that he was suicidal and that he needed information to be able to survive. There was one other victim that he knew who was dead, and so he didn't have any pattern for survival amongst the people he knew. And so I could see that he was very vulnerable. So I spoke to him another 3 or 4 times that week to get his feet on the ground and to do the best. It was, in a sense, it was looking after myself. It was looking after him, yes, but it was also looking after myself, because I knew from dealing with many other very fragile victims of abuse, some of whom had committed suicide, I didn't want another suicide. And so, in a sense, I was looking after him for me, if you see what I mean. I wanted him to make it. And so I did a bit of research from our discussions. I went back to where I was staying in Seaford in England. I did some Google searches, and I was looking for someone that I could never have found before. I was looking for the name of a particular victim of abuse, of a particular perpetrator in Australia, which would not have been findable before. But when I put in some Google search terms, after 2 hours of Google searching, I found him. I didn't know if he was alive or dead, but I knew he existed. I knew he identified the offender as an offender. He identified the offender who persuaded, or not persuaded, but induced another person to also become a pedophile, and that person was now in jail. So it seemed like there was some validity that I could check out, and it did check out. That was true. I checked that out. So that's where the story came from, and I just kept going forwards one step at a time, and in the end that story, which was 50 years old by the time it was published, but even so it ran front page of the Australian newspaper and front page of the London Times on the same day. And it had a big splash.
What did you learn from that experience that led you to think more theoretically or more about the practice of working across borders?
That it's possible. I was a journalist living in a regional town in Australia, and yet I was able to make connections from my home. which enabled me to write a story that shook up a major British institution. And I thought, well, that's pretty good. What else can I do? What else are other people already doing? And that became my PhD, to find out what the leading journalists in this country are doing and how they are doing it. So for my PhD, I interviewed 16 journalists, most of whom were finalists and winners of the 2013 Walkley Awards for investigative sections of the Walkley Awards, which is the most important national competition for journalism in Australia. I chose the participants carefully. They were all sections that were all media, so it was not just press, radio or television competing against each other. It was all media competing against each other. So I was getting the best in class, not just the best print or the best radio, the best of the best. And it was in investigative sections. They weren't necessarily named investigative, but when you're talking about the best in a social issues reporter in Australia, you are by definition talking about someone who has done an investigation that has led to something happening. So
yes, the impact, that you can measure the impact.
Social impact, socio-political impact. So we're talking about social issues reporting, best business reporting, best international reporting, those types of categories.
And what did you find out from this, interviews?
What I did was ask them how they got the story they got, which won the award. And I didn't tell them what I was looking for. I just wanted to hear from them what they did. And then from those narratives, they spoke that to me as a narrative of how it all unfolded, where they got the lead from, how they verified that, etc. And I then looked at those narratives and I worked out what was going on with all of them. And there were four basic things. So in 5 minutes, creative use of social media platforms for investigation is the first thing. Creative uses of web-based communications for investigation. Reporter collaboration, so working with someone else who is also a reporter, which might be a reporter sitting at the desk next to you, or at another office of the same media organisation, or collaborating with a reporter who works for a rival organisation in a different medium or the same medium, interstate or overseas. So any of those things. And also persuading the organisation to collaborate with another media outlet to investigate the story and to publish it collaboratively. So those collaborations are not coming from the top down. They are bottom-up collaborations where the journalists working on the story they both go to their boss and say, please collaborate, and this is why. Because that's not been done before. Usually an investigative journalist would work alone as what they call a lone wolf, and if there was a story they got that they couldn't do themselves, they would certainly never give it away. They would die with it in their notepad rather than give it to anyone or tell anyone what they were doing.
The culture of investigative journalism is changing?
I think it's changing slowly for some people. But I think as other people find out what is happening, and that almost all, so that all but one of those investigative sections were won by people collaborating. There was only one section or media section that was won by a journalist working by themselves. Every other one was a collaboration. So the journalists who are other journalists who are doing good work, who want to win a Walkley, who doesn't want to, they're going, there's lots of ingredients that go into it. Of course, there's lots of skill, there's lots of work, etc. But one of the ingredients is the combination of skills, the speeding up of investigations, etc. that happens when you collaborate with someone. Because I'm a freelance reporter, I collaborate with journalists in different organisations. And even for doing this research, I was really quite surprised because I'm, by definition, talking to some of the best reporters in the country. And yet, when I said, what is your Skype address? They didn't have Skype. So they had to get set up. Or I might say, what is your Facebook account? They're not on Facebook. And for some of them, that was a deliberate decision. One of the journalists said he is deliberately not on any social media to see whether it kills his career or not.
Have you had journalists who were concerned about sending delicate information over?
Oh, yes. That was a large part of what I did. And also phone tapping and the miniaturization of information, for example, is facilitating a lot of things. So it's a lot safer, obviously, to drop something on a stick, put it in the post, and send it to the place you want to send it, rather than send it over the internet. But there are also ways of encrypting things, and there are ways of being untraceable, even using email. You can send and receive email between two people without having any metadata at all, if you know what you're doing. And so that's what you do. So when there is a need, it's possible to do.
The steps that I sent to you earlier?
I saw those steps and I thought it looked awfully confusing. A complex set of steps to say what I'm doing is looking at what's happening now, and I'm trying to make a model for how things can be better. I would have some caution with that approach, because my plan started off with a view to build some sort of model for global investigative journalism, and in the end my supervisors just said, well, it's not your job to reinvent the wheel, don't do it. Just all my findings, they said, yep, that's fine. But when it came to the very chapter at the end where I said, well, this is the new model for investigative journalism, they just said, cut it off.
So what was your model about? How did it look? How did it look?
It was a model that took someone through the types of connections they need, basically, to operate as a journalist in what I would call the digital age, or the global journalistic age. Because you can have the potential. It's not that you do connect with billions of people. A single journalist can't do that. But it is the potential to be able to connect with a lot of people. That is the power of it. Mm-hmm. And therefore, it was just a step-by-step, depending on what someone's round is. If you're on a political round, then you'll connect with particular sorts of people. If you're on an agricultural round, you'll connect with particular sorts of people. You'll have secret Facebook accounts with some people. You'll have open Facebook groups with other people. You'll use Twitter for some particular things. You use Skype to interview anyone anywhere in the world. There will be different things you do with web-based communications, making sure that you have basic tools of trade, like and some things like GPS, which is a web-based communication, didn't used to be part of journalistic kit. You'd have a notebook, you'd have a pencil, you'd have a camera and an audio recording, but you didn't normally have a GPS. Now, if you're doing an environmental round, for example, and you need to locate damage done by a mining company of a national park, as one of my group did, one of my participant groups, it was vital kit. And it was so vital that Fairfax has rolled that out as regular part of kit for everyone in the news group, because they saw how important that was. And a GoPro, you know, to have a GoPro where you can just put a video on your head and walk somewhere and show your readers what you're seeing is a fabulous piece of kit. Yeah. So it's basic stuff, pretty basic stuff. No, I didn't want it.
You were putting together, consolidating the knowledge that was around.
Yes, but I was also drawing it out of the interviews that I had done with all the journalists. And
I would have liked to read that.
Yeah.
When you see any academic report, you validate it based on you see the method, how it was done.
Mm.
However, as a consumer, or even as a journalist, I see a story of another country. If I don't know the author, or you know the journalist who did it, or I don't know the media, I'm not sure if I'm going to trust. If I know how the story was made and I know a bit of the process of the method, then you can a bit know, you know, trust the story. So
it's quality assurance. It's quality assurance of both the journalism and the product of the journalistic investigation, which is the coverage on behalf of the reader, isn't it? It seems to me that what you're trying to create is a quality assurance framework. I wonder whether ISO 9000 might also work for journalism. So because there is an absence of quality assurance in journalism, customers look for brand as a substitute for quality assurance, because that's the only assurance we have.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying. Like if you don't know the, you know,
exactly.
the brand or the brand is the author of the media.
That is the function that brand is playing in the media, because there is no quality assurance of the way the journalism is done or the output that it makes. And I wonder if your quality assurance standards that you want to make are something that could be adopted by peak bodies of journalistic organisations around the world in any country, which maybe agree on something like a code of ethics and get a tick of approval by whoever, which could involve some little symbol beside their byline wherever their name is a byline, so that the readers can know actually they're a member of that union and they abide by a code of ethics. I mean, fantastic. It sets us apart from citizen journalists. Yeah. If I was a reader reading stuff and I could read a story by someone with an icon beside their name that says they're accredited by their national journalistic, whatever they are, standard setters, I would read that in preference to anything by anyone who doesn't have one. The trust, let's apply that into another field like medicine. If I go to my doctor, I trust him not because he's my doctor. If I've not been to him before, how do I know that he's not going to kill me or he's going to do the wrong thing? I know that because he's trained in Australia and he's accredited by the Australian Medical Board. Someone goes to talk to a journalist or a citizen journalist or someone who calls himself a journalist, there is no distinction between any of those. You could be getting a great journalist, you could be getting someone who's got no qualifications at all.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to meet you, and I really appreciate your generosity with ideas and honesty.
That's okay. Thank you.